Everyone, thanks for joining us today. Kelvin and I are really excited to get started. We're going to give everyone a couple of minutes. We assume you're switching from one video conferencing platform to this one. So we'll give it a couple minutes and then we'll get started. Kelvin, what city are you joining us from today?
I'm in lovely Foster City, California.
All right, cool. So we've got it covered. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we're spanning the whole US. And for everyone joining, we do have chat. So if you look in the right column there, you should see a way to do the chat, and we'll also have some Q&A time at the end. So if you have any questions, you can put them in chat, you can put them in Q&A, whatever works best for you. Thanks, Alexa, for doing that. And Kelvin and I saw some friendly faces in the registration. So hello to all the folks that we know in real life. That's always good to see you. But Kelvin, let's get started today. I know everyone is busy this time of year, closing quarters, starting quarters, trying to hit pipeline. I was really excited for us to get the time together today to talk about what we're calling the Great Pipeline Reset and how the post platform era is reshaping B2B demand generation. So we're seeing a ton of changes here. For those who don't know me, I'm Chris Moody. I'm Chief Go-to-Market Evangelist at DemandScience. And Kelvin, I'll pass over to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. Kelvin Gee. I'm Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. I cover ABM, marketing programs. I evaluate revenue marketing platforms. And I'm also here to talk about preference marketing, which you're going to hear more about today.
Outstanding. Well, let's jump in. I love the way we're starting this one, Kelvin, and your story here, because it really resonates with everything we're living.
Yeah, we often correlate preference marketing, again, which we're going to talk about, with being on being in pole position, and which is a Formula One reference. So I'd like to kick things off with a Formula One story. So imagine that you are a principal of a Formula One team, and you arrive at the first race of the racing season already knowing that your car is not good or fast enough to win the race. That was McLaren's reality back in 2023. And for those who know Formula One, McLaren is not an inexperienced team. I mean, they have one of the strongest brands in motorsports today. They have talented drivers, they got great engineers, they got plenty of racing data, they got great racing technology. Everyone was working hard, but for some reason, the car was just not producing. It was just not winning races for some reason. And so in Formula One, when a car is not performing, the tempting solution is to search for the missing ingredient, which is typically more power or more downforce or more people. But the problem is that in Formula One, the car is an interconnected system. So if you optimize one component in isolation, the whole car can still get slower. So for example, you can add more power and it will add more speed, but it will also introduce heat, higher fuel consumption, and reliability issues. You can also add more downforce, and that will add more grip, but it will also increase drag. And then you can add more people, and that will increase effort, but also may increase some alignment issues and some chemistry issues. So for McLaren, the issue wasn't a lack of engineering or technology. The issue was systematic. It was system level performance across the entire team. And so McLaren's new team principal, Andrea Stella, he came in and he didn't treat the problem as one underperforming department or team or component. He didn't point fingers, but rather he reconsidered how everything was done, how technical decisions were made, how he clarified different areas of responsibility and roles. He also focused the development around a clearer diagnosis of the car. So Andrea's reset was not about one magic component like technology. It was about coordinating engineering, data, strategy, driver insight around one single outcome. And at the Austrian Grand Prix later that year, McLaren introduced the first major stage of a new upgrade package. And Lando Norris, McLaren's lead driver, he finished fourth. One race earlier, that kind of result would have been unlikely. Eventually, more upgrades followed and more podiums followed. The point here is that the team didn't suddenly find one magical component. It had built a closed loop system capable of learning, coordinating, and improving much, much faster. And in less than 2 seasons, McLaren went from starting 2023 near the back of the grid to winning the 2024 Constructors' Championship, its first since 1998. And it wasn't a one-off. They repeated as champions in 2025 as well. So the same drivers didn't suddenly become more talented. The team didn't discover new effort. The organization did not simply collect more data, but rather McLaren aligned the parts around one single outcome, which was making the entire car faster. And that brings us to marketing. Most organizations today have talented people. They have sophisticated platforms. They have abundant signals and no shortage of activity. Brand is building awareness, demand is generating engagement, sales is following up on opportunities, technology is collecting data. Every component can report that it is doing its job, yet the business can still be losing the race. So the fix is not simply another engine or platform. The fix is aligning the various teams around one commercial system designed to create pipeline. And that brings us to today's agenda, which I'll hand it over to you, Chris, to
Thank you,
cover.
Kelvin. Yeah, I love that story. I think we're conditioned to just think more is always better. We need more, more, more. And when you think about it in a finely tuned experience like F1, it's a really good representation of what we're going to talk about today. So the first topic that we will cover, it's on the systems we built and the buyers who have changed. So we're going to share data from lots of different sources. Kelvin has some incredible data from Forrester to share with us there. Then we will jump into what we call the platform tax. So we'll explain that. And that part will also cover what is breaking and the marketing mojo change that has to happen to get things right. From there, in the third section, we're going to cover how 1 + 1 = 3. So this is really the brand and demand story and how we need to represent that. And Kelvin has incredible insights from his keynote on that section as well. Lastly, we're going to start to move in the back straight and talk about takeaways from top performing CMOs and their organizations, so what they're doing, and that will bring us into the operating model shift that we need to make before 2027. So again, as you have questions, let us know, pop them in the Q&A section. We will tackle those at the end, but we're going to move things as quick as possible. So to keep going with the F1, we know that days are busy, so we will keep this at a brisk pace. The first thing that we really have to cover, the buyers we market to now are not the buyers we built our tech stacks for. A lot has changed. Every 12 months, I feel like we're a broken record in marketing saying so much has changed, so much has changed, the most change ever. But this has actually happened this time. So we've seen from Forrester research that Kelvin will talk about in more detail in a bit, 68% of B2B buyers have a favorite before a purchase process. So pre-form fill, there's already a favorite that we're competing against if we're not the favorite. Secondly, we're seeing AI influence preferences. So 94% use generative AI tools during their purchase process. I can tell you from lots of purchasing experiences personally and professionally, I'm building out comparison tables with lots of tools. I'm running research. I'm trying to understand all the different speeds and feeds and things that I need to consider before I'm talking to a sales rep, even if it's something for myself, a DIY project. I'm comparing prices, every single thing. So this is happening in the B2B context almost every single time. And then lastly, bigger, quieter buying groups. So Forrester research that Kelvin will hit on as well. There are 22 average people in a buying group. So 13 internal stakeholders and 9 external influencers. So the days of thinking that we can get one hot lead and close a deal, that's fairly rare. We have to round out the whole buying group, and that's not happening in many situations today. When we start to break this down into a couple different sections, the math just doesn't math. This is the honesty check part here. We have to think about this. So what we see across lots of research that we've done here at DemandScience, we call the license tax, this ability here that starts to happen when you buy lots of things and you don't use them all. So from our research, 35% of features are licensed but never used. So you're paying for capability that you never capture. So when you think about a lot of the tools you're buying in your tech stack, you may be buying it for one very small use case that you're hoping works or that you know works. There's a lot of waste that's happening in the spend there. And as we start to build towards this, the integration tax, we see that as well. So 94% of teams with 16 or more tools spend most of their time fixing problems, not building programs. If we are on the hook for pipeline, we need to be doing everything we can to drive pipeline. Stitching together tools is not the best use of most of our time. The third section here, the data mirage tax. So 87% of organizations actively chase intent signals, but only 26% of those signals convert to qualified opportunities. I want to talk about this one a bit because this one's huge. This is the biggest gap we saw in the research we did in our data mirage report. So that's a 60-point gap between signal volume and signal quality. And we call that the signal mirage. So if we start to unpack this, this is phantom activity. These are teams that see high engagement metrics and assume pipeline is building, but most of it evaporates when sales actually tries to engage. This costs a ton of money. Our research shows that chasing false positive signals, that represents a significant portion of what ended up being around a 25% average budget waste in marketing budgets. So when we've talked to lots of organizations, that's costing a ton of money. And this was the number one most expensive inefficiency in B2B marketing. And sales learns this quickly. We've all been there, but sales teams learn that if a hot lead, if that's noise, they're going to ignore it. So we're conditioning sales to ignore a lot of what is getting delivered, whether we're pursuing accounts or leads. If we're giving them bad information, they're not going to go after it. And marketing is going to keep paying for those signal providers and the tracking platforms to do this. And this is masking the real problem because signal volume looks high. Teams think that everything is working. Dashboards may show green, but CFOs are seeing red. And this is a huge disconnect that we're going to talk about today. And all of these together build into the platform tax. So that is where 25% of marketing budget is wasted on overlapping, disconnected tools. We have a tool to calculate this. We will put a QR code up on the screen near the end of our time today. But one thing Kelvin's going to hit on that I want to set up a little bit before we transition back, what's actually breaking here? We're still living in two different universes. So we're still trying to do great things with brands. So if we look at this figure 8 track here, right? On the red side, we have brand that's running and doing the right things. They're going to try to create awareness. They're trying to get in front of buyers. They're trying to change preference before it's established to go with the Forrester research. And they are doing what they're supposed to do. And then on the blue side here, we have demand. They're running their loop. But in many cases, the pursuit of pipeline and the pursuit of awareness, that are not working together. These are two different systems. They're not always using the same data. They're not talking to each other. And this figure 8 racetrack is actually just two different teams running in circles, and they're never intersecting or working together. So we have to start to unpack this and figure this out to solve the problems. And this leads to the biggest execution gap that we're seeing today. So brand and demand, this miss between the two, the execution gap, it's pretty easy to describe. So if I break it down into 3 steps, think about getting a hot lead. So a hot one comes in, a platform flags a priority account. So we can call it ABM, we can call it demand gen, does not matter to me. A hot one comes in, sales gets that information, and then they see that they may have 2 or 3 contacts that they can legally reach out to. So these are opted in contacts. They reach out to them, everyone crosses their fingers, and we hope that it converts, and then we go about our jobs. But then it doesn't convert. So we move into the second section here, and it fails. We write off that campaign. We say that it didn't work. All of the work was done in vain, and it's written off as a failure. So everyone probably blames the messaging that was never sent to the entire buying group. So we only captured 2 or 3 people of the 22 that we need to influence. And then we're running on to the next thing. So we're going to our next quarterly campaign or what we have to do next to try to bring in pipeline. We're not really solving the problem. And that's because we don't have an audit. So if there's no audit, the teams build the next campaign, the core issue persists, and there remains no execution path to hit the proper audience at all. And this is happening over and over and over again in lots of organizations. And it's all smart people with great intentions trying to do their jobs well, but we're not approaching things the right way. So Kelvin, talk to us about everything that you're seeing at Forrester.
Yeah, that execution gap and that figure 8 loop is accurate. We're seeing the same thing. First of all, going back to Formula One, B2B buyers don't start with an even grid. We might imagine that buyers place vendors on an even start, but that's really wishful thinking. Instead, at the start of the buyer's journey, at the start of the race, if you will, buyers have clear vendor preferences and have already decided which vendors are in pole position and which are at the back of the grid. So when we look at the B2B buyer's journey shown here, the data is very clear. At the very start of the buyer's journey, when a buying group first forms, 68% of buyers already have a front runner in pole position. And 80% of the time, that preferred vendor wins. So buyers know which vendors they want to work with long before the buyer's journey begins. And so when you do the math, more than half the time, the race is already won. The preferred vendor wins the business 55% of the time on average. And so let's be honest. Everybody in this webinar would take these odds every single day of the week. And so here's the harsh truth. Most B2B marketing is chasing deals already lost. Modern B2B buyers are increasingly independent, empowered, and decisive. And the buyer's journey has become a process of confirmation, not selection. So all that work, all that effort, all that costs is often wasted. So Chris talked about this figure 8. That's actually not a figure 8 because those two circles never connect. And we see the same thing. Today, B2B marketing is a house divided. B2B marketing teams are essentially a mess. They are not organized well, or they run in ways that help them build buyer preferences in their own silos. So first of all, there is team brand, which is represented on the left by my colleague, Ian Bruce. He runs brand research at Forrester, and he was my co-keynote speaker at the Forrester B2B Summit. So he's team brand. And then there's team demand, represented by myself. And we have separate programs, we have separate budgets, we have separate metrics, and we're almost like two competing cars in the same race. It's untenable. It's not what modern buyers want. And the symptoms of the problems are everywhere. So if you look at team brand, for example, they typically live in an ivory tower. They run these vague air cover campaigns with no direct connections to business outcomes. I mean, did you guys only realize that only a quarter of B2B marketing leaders think they can measure the ROI of these brand investments? And on top of that, many of these brand programs are based on a wish and a prayer, which means that you turn them on when times are good, and then you immediately turn them off when times are bad, which is really unacceptable given that team brand is responsible for driving preference in the first place. So team brand needs to step up big time and get much closer to business outcomes. And then there's team demand. Well, we're no better. We've ignored the impact of brand building and reputation for many, many years. Most B2B organizations have pivoted heavily towards intent-based so-called performance marketing with an underinvestment in brand. So we don't consider the realities of getting into pole position. And these performance marketing tactics often underperform. So we're increasingly inefficient and ineffective. And we all know this. We all know we need a new playbook. So in truth, team demand, we're feeling the pressure to deliver near-term results, to deliver sales opportunities this quarter, right now. And any conversation about the need for long-term thinking is often stifled. So we know that things need to change on team demand as well. So, question is, how do we get in pole position? We know we have a problem, and faced with this reality, we have to figure out, how do we do this? And the answer is that we need to unite brand and demand with preference marketing. Preference marketing is the engine of the integrated brand and demand teams working together. The focus is on building preference together, a shared approach that connects brand building to demand performance, coordinated campaigns, shared budgets, a way to directly connect brand investments to business outcomes by integrating with demand programs. Preference marketing is a driver for creating demand programs that drive long-term growth. But most of all, it's alignment with buyer needs. And that's really what makes preference marketing really, really important. So using the insights we discussed in terms of brand programs and demand programs, you can start to calibrate brand and demand investments using a very simple, easy to understand 2x2 model. First, along the y-axis, you have market preference for a given market. It's analysis around brand awareness, brand sentiment, and brand preference. Next, on the x-axis, there's buying group interaction. And it's the triangulation of first-party and third-party interactions. And if you can start to triangulate that, you can start to see how buying groups are engaging with you. Now, taken together, these insights can help you understand your preference positioning and how to engage based on how much buyers favor you. So, for example, if market preference and interaction are both high, then congratulations, you're in pole position. And with this advantage, you should defend your position against competitors while validating your value proposition. You might even want to expand the size of your existing opportunity. To use a B2C example, Apple is an example of a company in pole position in the North American smartphone market. But what if market preference is high, but buyers aren't interacting with you? Well, then you are a contender. And here, the priority is to convert that market preference into active pipeline. And so you want to invest in demand programs that deepen engagement and increases the frequency of that engagement. So Samsung might be an example of a contender in the smartphone market. And then you have the underdog. And the underdog is when the market does not see you as a leader, but buyers are still interacting with you. And here, you want to maintain your demand momentum, but invest in brand programs to build trust and credibility. Google is an example of an underdog in the smartphone market. And then finally, you've got long shot. And this is where the underlying market does not see you as a leader, right? So market preference is poor, and buyer interaction is also weak and poor. So as a long shot, you want to be anywhere else than where you currently are. And here you want to test and validate your ICP fit and to see if things are viable. And if things still aren't going your way, you might have to cut your losses and exit the market altogether. Motorola might be an example of a long shot player in the smartphone market. And so with this 2x2 grid, you can start to determine your market, your preference marketing position, and design a playbook to help you move your buyers and your brand in a more favorable spot. Chris, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I love that, Kelvin. I suspect we'll get at least one question about, I think I'm here. How do I go to there? So we'll
Right.
probably revisit that one. Let's talk about what top performing CMOs and their organizations are doing today. I'm going to cover these one by one, and then I'll kick to Kelvin for what you've seen, Kelvin. So we'll talk about these together. But the first thing that I've been observing for years, but especially over the last few months, only stars. So when we're talking to CMOs, they are not looking to hire lots of people now. They are trying to find the unicorns. And if you've ever looked at job recs in the last 6 months, you'll say, wow, that's like 3 job recs all jammed into one. It's quite intentional. I think that what we're starting to see here is teams are leveling up, hires are more precious, harder to come by. AI is changing a lot and how that happens too. But there's a relentless pursuit of retaining and attracting stars. So if you employ stars and you're a CMO or a marketing leader, you better make sure you don't lose them because other people are reaching out to them. And then if you don't feel like you're quite at that level, do everything you can to get there. But we're seeing a lot of roles and responsibilities that are changing and being redefined based on AI use cases. So what used to take 10 people or a bunch of disparate teams, maybe 1 or 2 people with smart use cases for how they are using AI. And I will shout out Fez for the sandwich model. So it's human led, like humans using AI and then humans reviewing AI, not AI led and AI first. But Kelvin, what are you seeing with team structure and some of the trends there?
Yeah, absolutely. CMOs are taking the opportunity to reevaluate their roles and open headcount and redesigning the job description, right? And so we're starting to see this emerging role of a GTM engineer, go to market engineer, as an emerging role. And this is kind of this hybrid role between a RevOps technical person with demand programs chops. And so this role is now designed for stitching together, integrating data sources, building agents, operating them, orchestrating demand programs across multiple channels. And so it's kind of a rare breed. And to your point, Chris, there's not a lot of people who have a lot of this experience. So CMOs are recruiting from like software engineers, for example, or other roles that have a very entrepreneurial, technical. So they are bringing in people with maybe not traditional demand gen experience and hoping that they learn on the job. So that's something that we're starting to see. And the other thing we're starting to see is this concept of an AI operations role, again, largely driven by AI use cases. So those are 2 things that we're starting to see.
Awesome. The second huge focus on pipeline, which look, we've said this for decades. I look, Calvin, I know you had demand. We talked about this in our prep a bunch of different times at a lot of different organizations. I don't think we've ever neglected to prioritize pipeline, but pipeline being the number one, number two, and number three metric is certainly a trend. And we're still seeing more folks hiring for people to drive pipeline. But marketing needs to be talking about this on a daily basis. And I will definitely talk out of both sides of my mouth here because this involves brand and demand. So, pipeline is the metric, it's what we talk about, but we have to be getting earlier in the funnel. So we can't just look at qualified leads and opportunities. We need lots of those, we need them delivered. But this also underscores the importance of brand. And Kelvin, you hit on this on the slide with where you were in your incredible Formula One suit. But a big point here, I think the pursuit of pipeline has been perceived to be at the expense of brand, which certainly cannot happen because then we're not changing preference. And to that point, brand is often the differentiator in why we buy. If we love a brand, we take that brand with us. We want to buy from that brand. And when LinkedIn did research on this, roughly 1/3 of the top performers that they surveyed split brand awareness and performance marketing budgets 50-50, literally 50-50, which is a very high number for those of us who have run demand programs. And we know that 70 to 80% is usually going to the demand side to drive pipeline. But we're in a day and age where we have to be getting in front of buyers earlier. We have to be ranking for the LLMs. This is something we're helping a ton of clients with right now. But all of these things are putting the brand in front of when pipeline comes in the door. So, Calvin, what are you seeing around pipeline?
Yeah, no, pipeline's still going to be the number one thing because that's what sales cares about the most, right? So we want to look at pipeline growth, typically regardless of source and attribution, right? Because account base is a team sport. But to your point earlier and to my point earlier, you can't focus on pipeline and forget about the role of brand because, like we just talked about, buyers are a lot more intentional and they're doing their homework, often with AI's help. And so you need to be visible. You need to have that awareness. You need to drive sentiment and you need to drive preference much, much, much earlier now, based on our data that we talked about. And so if you have demand without brand, well, again, you're kind of throwing money out the window. And so it's really brand programs that are connected to demand programs, which is the multiplier effect. That's the 1 + 1 = 3 effect, right? So what that means is brand can't be running programs in isolation. You just can't be measuring things like awareness because that's the first thing that's going to get cut when things get tough. But if brand can tie their programs to actual demand programs, which is represented by pipeline growth, now you're cooking with gas, right? And that's what we're talking about here is not this blind focus on just pipeline for pipeline's sake. You have to connect brand preference to demand. Someone once said, brand is demand, right? And I love that quote. And the other thing I love is the hashtag brand gen, which you see on LinkedIn every now and then, right? So this idea of two disconnected programs, teams that are running their own separate thing, that stuff is in the past. This is the new muscle that we need to exercise, though. And that's what we're talking about together, bringing brand and demand together.
Yeah, we are definitely seeing that one, Kelvin. I know for most of our clients, we're helping with advertising, content syndication, bringing in actual qualified leads and the verified buyer signals and combining all of that into the multi-orchestrated campaigns that are being run on their behalf. But it's literally in one system, not in, well, we've got our advertising platform here and that business and that team and then all the different teams. And that leads us into trimming the budget waste. This is the other trend that we're seeing with the top performing CMOs over and over. High performers are 47 percentage points more likely to have strong attribution coverage than low performers. If it is not working and driving pipeline, brand is pipeline, brand is demand. Let's also keep that in mind here. But if it's not driving pipeline, it's on the chopping block. This is a trend that we've been seeing for years, but it has really ramped up in recent days. And by relying on transparent, verified buyer intent rather than click metrics, top CMOs are lowering budget waste from 30% to 23% or less. So we've seen that number that starts to get decreased when we're not chasing pure volume, but focusing on verified signals with transparent sourcing. So this is the case where fewer signals overall can mean that we're converting at more meaningful rates and spending more wisely. But this is one that I'm continuing to see. I mean, I know that many folks are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in tools and platforms. And as everything starts to enter an MCP interface and we use AI, we're paying for access to tools that may not be directly driving the results that we need for the business. So a lot of the folks I'm talking with, this is usually the first thing they bring up. We're looking to cut. We need someone to help us with these things and guaranteed outcomes. What are you seeing in this category, Kelvin?
Yeah, this falls into my research coverage around adaptive programs, which are programs that are signal-based. You're leveraging signals to make those decisions, AI being at the centerpiece of that to orchestrate. But what you're trying to do is build a closed-loop, self-optimizing program, right? My analogy is the self-driving car, again, using car reference, where you're learning from all these tactics and content and channels and asset types. And AI is helping you do some A/B testing on messaging, offer testing, and you're learning from all these different variations to optimize the program. So again, it's a self-learning, continuous, self-optimizing closed loop program. And so by doing that, you're starting to weed out content and channels that might be underperforming. And so you're kind of building and flying that plane at the same time, which is a much better approach than waiting until the program ends 6 months later and then realizing, oh, that content really dragged down results after the fact, or that channel really sucked eggs. We shouldn't have done that. So that's what we're starting to see, and with a lot of the approaches, having an adaptive strategy and an adaptive closed loop planning process, you can start to reduce some of this waste.
Yeah, great points there, Kelvin. And then one that I'm really passionate about, and we're seeing a lot as well, breaking the traditional stack. So some platforms stay, some platforms go. We've all been there, we've all lived it, but we're seeing the top CMOs are ruthlessly prioritizing what is in-house and what they need operators for versus what's going to partners or managed service providers who are going to guarantee the outcomes they need. And we'll talk about this some on the next slide before I kick to you, Kelvin, but I do think there's almost been this badge of honor in the past of us doing everything ourselves. We wanted to obscure who was doing work on our behalf to help us get the results. And I'm seeing a big swing in that because folks are building their own tools, trying to stitch things together with AI. Now, whether that has merit or not is a totally different webinar, totally different coverage topic for Forrester. But it's certainly the case that the traditional way we built and invested in tech is very different now. And it includes lots of different players plugging into gaps to help build those closed loop self-optimizing systems. Because if someone can do that for you, we want the diversified mix, right? We may be invested in hundreds of thousands of dollars of tech. Great. We're not saying rip it all out right now, but we need to be testing other things and working with other folks who can help supplement pipeline. And then if we're seeing that investment's working more, I'm seeing top CMOs say, I've got all these things running, and then I'm adjusting the levers based on what's working. What all are you seeing, Kelvin?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of downward pressure now on CMOs, right, to do more with less, right? We've heard that time and time again. And that's especially true now with reduced headcount, reduced budgets. Yet everyone's kind of tasked to either do more or maintain the status quo with fewer people, fewer resources, fewer budgets. So there's definitely an opportunity to leverage partners like DemandScience, and to use you guys as an extension of the marketing team, because people need more help. People need help with their strategy. People need help with their AI approach because they don't know. They need help figuring that out. And God knows people need help with their content. That's really where we see a great opportunity for marketers to reach out. And like you said, it's typically a badge of honor to kind of DIY everything in house. But I think we're starting to see an opening where that perception is starting to change. Like this acknowledgement that, you know what, we can't do it ourselves. We do need help. We have smaller teams, we have smaller budgets, and uh, we need better guidance, and we need a better approach. And whether that's preference marketing, integrating brand and demand, figuring out the AI strategy, avoiding the platform tax, or getting more out of their current investment because they're not leveraging all the bells and whistles that they're currently paying for, right? That's really where the opportunity is with companies like DemandScience.
Yeah, love that, Kelvin. And it fits nicely into the new operating model. And look, I was an analyst years ago. I've been in this space, and so many of the conversations I feel like Kelvin and I have, they are therapy sessions. And this is a very difficult profession. Being a marketing leader is not for the faint of heart. It's tough. You're never totally secure in your job. You're never feeling like everything is a home run. And you're always trying to plan for future quarters while surviving the day to day. So that's the world we live in. That has not changed. It will not change. But we are seeing a new operating model where us feeling insecure about spending more with partners or streamlining teams or reducing the number of tools in the stack, those days are definitely gone. When we're talking to boards and investment partners, they are looking for well run, streamlined teams that are not over investing in tech. So, this is about right sizing and trying to get the right people all in our ecosystem, because that's where we get the speed and can align all the spend to desired outcomes. And that's what I'm seeing set organizations apart. I mean, all the brands that we all love, every single person on here, they're probably investing more money in brand than what we're doing. I mean, let's just be honest. They probably are, but they've also figured out on the demand side, here are all the different ways I'm going to bring in pipeline. And if you're curious about a new one, test it. To Kelvin's point, like, we're not saying cancel your contract immediately. We are saying there may be other ways to get to the number and better invest in brand and the strategy you need. And that's the operating model that we are seeing take place more often today. And Kelvin, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add on this one, or if we keep trucking along.
Now let's get some questions.
All right, cool. And then one thing before we jump to questions, we talked about the platform tax. So if you have a mobile phone, which I am assuming most of you do, I have 4 kids, only one has a phone, so I have a bigger tax that's going to be hitting me soon on my cell phone bill. But if you scan this QR code or go to bit.ly/platform tax 2026, you can put in your actual numbers and calculate based on what you're doing today, what you're spending, how much money could be better served going straight into the pursuit of pipeline through orchestrated programs. That's something we do a lot here at DemandScience. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. So this is called the platform tax. We have a manifesto and a calculator. This will take you to that. Let me know if you have any questions. I put my LinkedIn in the chat. But speaking of questions, let's jump into Q&A. And I know that there was one I was watching here. We still have time for more questions. So if anyone wants to put one in the chat, one question that I saw come through here, Kelvin, let me just click the right button here. All right. You showed that 68% of buyers enter the journey with a front runner already in mind. For companies not in pole position, what's the realistic timeline to build enough preference to compete? And what comes first, brand or demand?
Yeah, definitely. I'll tackle the last one first. Brand comes first, right? Brand seeds demand. And that's where again, we see the gap where companies aren't investing enough in brand programs, right, to seed demand. There's kind of this over rotation on performance marketing, right? And so that's the number one. In terms of the timeline, it's typically this is not an overnight fix, especially if you have low market preference, right? So that and you need to invest in brand programs, right? That's what we're telling you. So if you're in that long shot or underdog position, you need to invest in brand programs, and that doesn't change overnight. Those things typically take 12 to 24 months. You want to build long-term, durable brand programs that introduces your company, generates awareness, changes sentiment, and then over time positions you in pole position in terms of creating preference. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. Um, so that's really the investment there. If you do have strong market preference but no buyer interaction, right? You're a contender, for example, then you need to invest in demand programs. That's a little bit easier to ramp up, right? That's easier to drive engagement. But the driving market preference is an investment in brand programs. We have a great framework here at Forrester to talk about how you can start to measure that. It's the Forrester B2B brand measurement framework. But yeah, I would say 18 to 24 months is the rough time frame. But you
Yeah.
need to invest also in brand tracking studies to measure the effectiveness of those brand programs.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, Kelvin. In my head, I was thinking 12 to 24 months, so we're right there too. And one thing I love underdogs, both in your two by two and just in general, in life, in sports, everything. So if you have that high interaction, low preference, you have to maintain demand momentum while investing heavily in brand. But I think that's when you can start to do things to make an impact in days. And the McLaren analogy was really good there. They didn't stop racing. They were trying to get the results while making improvements and then continuing to improve. And, there are things you can do in days. I mean, LLM citation rate is a fun one to track. We helped one client improve their citation rate by 80% in less than 3 weeks. It's a big project, right? But that's something we did entirely for them. All the content creation, help them to publish it, put that out there, and then the intake. So there are ways we can start to do this in days, but we have to have our eye on the prize in the longer game too. So I agree with everything there. Okay, we have another question here. The data shows a 22-person buying group on average, but sales may only be able to email 2 to 3 opted in contacts. How does preference marketing actually solve that execution gap? And then there were some specifics, like is it a data compliance problem or a content distribution problem?
Yeah, two answers to that. One is, like I said, marketing is preference marketing is a team sport, right? It requires marketing and sales, brand and demand, and sales to get along, right? And to work together. So if sales is only contacting or reaching out to 2 to 3 contacts in a buying group, and again, our data, your data shows that buying groups are typically in the range of 17 to 22 members on the enterprise side, then you're only scratching the surface. And so that's really where marketing needs to step in and help in terms of engaging additional members of that buying group. So if sales is only reaching out to, say, like IT professionals, and you need to reach procurement, finance, and users, that's really where marketing can step in and help either identify, procure additional contacts, and then engage those using marketing channels like ads, content syndication, events, a direct mail, connected TV, et cetera, et cetera. That's number one. But the other thing is buying networks. Like our research shows that half of the buying group consists of people who are outside of the target account payroll. So they're not even part of your target accounts. So we're talking about influencers, we're talking about analysts, consultants, customers, agencies, peers, right? CMOs talk to other CMOs. And so how do you influence those people, right, who are very influential in driving preference? And that's really where, again, marketing can step in and start to build influencer campaigns to help influence the influencers.
Yeah, I really like that. Totally agree with you on that too. It flips the problem. So instead of thinking compliance, preference marketing lets us think about how do we market to those folks. So instead of asking, how do I email the 22 people in the buying group, which is impossible to do at scale, honestly, you're asking, how do I make sure all 22 people encounter our brand and our value props before they form that complete buying group? And that's influencing now outside folks as well. And that's what brand does. And, I will shout out high value offers, which is something I'm really passionate about too. I mean, think of what you can put in front of the potential buying group that would attract them and pull out more to engage with you. So that could be on-site workshop. It could be something cool you do at an event. Like it could be co-marketing at one of Forrester's events and having a special dinner that you collaborate on. It could be anything, but it's trying to identify pain, help to solve that pain, and work together on that. So I think that's really good in trying to get in front of folks. And then there's one more, if we don't have any buzzer beaters. We mentioned that top performers are ruthlessly prioritizing their marketing stacks and moving to potential managed service providers. For a mid-market company that's been investing in platforms for years, what's the ROI threshold before deciding to potentially change a tool or optimize it? You want to start on this one, Kelvin, or you want me to take a stab first and then let you clean up?
Yeah, why don't you take a stab since this is kind of right up your alley?
Okay, cool. The first thing I would say, like, I I'm a big believer in sunk cost, and that's not a fun topic to talk about. Like, I don't think we can factor in what we've spent in the past. My question is this tool helping me build preference or activate demand today? So if we take everything we've learned today, everything you're doing should be helping with those. And if you look at all of your qualified opportunities in your CRM, run it back to the programs or channels that created it or influenced it, and you audit that, if a tool is bringing in a small percentage of the identified pipeline relative to its cost, then that's not a foundational system. Like that becomes something that you need to consider removing. And, the 50-50 brand split, I think that's really hard to do, but we have to have a core set of tools that we're using. The one thing I would suggest to any mid-market company as well is to test, like find people you can work with, which obviously DemandScience is one of those, but find people you can work with to test your different theories in other ways. So if you put $30,000 towards, I want to improve how I'm showing up with LLMs and the content build out and everything there, help me with that. And we're going to measure how it works. Compare that to 30,000 spent in a couple other places, right? And the budget varies, but before I would commit hundreds of thousands of dollars on tooling to try to get me there, I would try to test some quicker turn things while I'm focused on the long game. So, I'm a big believer in a diversified portfolio in all aspects of my life. And I think the same applies to how we go capture preference and demand. I mean, we have to be doing lots of things and figure out what's working versus putting all our eggs in one basket. But Kelvin, you may have a different view here.
Not necessarily different, but just I just want to add to that. So I talk to clients every day, right, who have platforms, and the reason why they're not seeing the ROI is because they don't have the right strategy in place. So you need the right strategy, and I would argue that preference marketing is the right strategy. Platforms have a place if to support that strategy if you're using your platforms well. Most of the time, you're paying this platform tax because you're not using all the bells and whistles in that platform. There's one client I talked to, they're using the platform just to serve up display ads to 12 accounts. and that's it. And so clearly they're not using the platforms to its full ability. And so that's why they need a new approach, a new playbook. And I would argue that preference marketing is that playbook. Platforms and partners like DemandScience absolutely have a role in helping drive, define, and execute that preference marketing playbook, right? With the platforms or without the platforms. But there's a role for the platforms to play in preference marketing, right? I mean, you need to drive brand. Well, you're using activation channels like email, display ads, social, content syndication. Those are all, they all have brand elements. So you're actively using those channels to drive brand in that case. But again, you need the right strategy in place, and most clients that I talk to don't have the right strategy.
Yep. I think that's totally fair. And, sometimes a lot of different teams and people are involved, which fits with the execution of the strategy. If you're having to go through all these different ways to execute. So lots of things to factor in, but we are coming up on our time. Really appreciate all the questions that came in, the participation from folks. Kelvin and I would love to connect with all of you on LinkedIn. We've put our profiles there in the chat. But Kelvin, huge thanks to you. Thanks for joining me today. It was really good to see you again.
Always a pleasure, Chris.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.